Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And this episode's brought to you by our Patreon members. Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. What's happening, Spoon?
Well, it's a nice spring day and in New York City, and it looks like it was a pretty good spring day in Nazareth, Pennsylvania recently when they had the 2024 event for the behind-the-scenes supporters, and with a lot of very cool people talking about a lot of very cool stuff.
Yes, sir. Let me set the stage, if you will, because I'm going to take you backstage. Back on May 17th, 2024, Martin unveiled, or I should say invited, the Backstage All Access members, which used to be called the Martin Owners Club. They invited us all to a very special afternoon evening of An Evening with Chris Martin, a welcome speech by Thomas Ripsum, the CEO and president. Some of the R&D and behind-the-scenes people like Fred Green were talking about behind the design. And all in all, it was about 3 or 4 hours of really interesting, fun-filled, educational information top to bottom. And if you weren't careful, you also saw some really great guitars played by Craig Thatcher woven into Chris's speech. Chris took us through the decades as fast as he could. And every time he got to another milestone, he gave Craig Thatcher a guitar that really made everything make sense. And of course, Craig played some really great chops. So it was a really nice afternoon. I think we should really dissect it and go into some detail because a lot of cool things were brought to the table. And if you weren't there, you wouldn't know what we're talking about. But we want to bring you a little bit of a peek backstage. Of course, we can't show you everything, and we can't do wrong by all those people who have signed up for the Martin Backstage Club. But in case you want to go to the next one, I sort of think it's our responsibility to give you a good tease. And Spoon, what do you remember from the event that I was telling you about, and where would you like to start?
Well, we could actually quickly, you went through it very quickly, but we can basically start at the beginning. Thomas came out and joked a little bit about the fact that he's been the president and CEO of Martin for 3 years now, or over 3 years, and therefore, as far as Martin, lovers are concerned, he hasn't even joined the company yet. And given their 190, now heading on 191-year history. But great guy. If you guys do not know this, he designed the CEO 10 model with all its environmentally friendly aspects, and is a great boon to the company now that Chris Martin is officially retired and acting as chairman of the board, and well-deserved after 36 years at the head of the company. Yeah. Or at least since he joined the company. And so he kind of set up the fact that Martin's been through a lot, but that unlike an awful lot of companies, the pandemic was actually really good for Martin because an awful lot of people decided life is short, I'm stuck at home, I'm going to go back to playing the guitar, or I'm going to learn to play the guitar for the first time. And the sales of the company really went up during and then after the rebound after COVID was a very good thing for Martin. So they're doing well in terms of a company. And then they moved on to some of their new things that they're excited about. And one of them, which we've already done an episode on, but we can mention briefly again, is this new maple walnut guitar that's got the advanced engineering in it. And so why don't you talk a little bit about what they talked about the Inception model, the GPCE Inception.
I would love to. It was actually pretty cool. During the speech, Fred Green was on the calendar there, or on the itinerary, where after Thomas welcomed everybody, it was Fred Green's job to go ahead and do a little bit of a presentation, what they called behind the design. And it was funny, during sound check, I was lucky enough to be in the room 2.5 hours before the whole thing started. And I got to chat with a couple different people that I otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. And Fred pulled me aside, and I said hello for you, and he said hello back and all that. And it was actually the very first time I got to formally meet him as many times as I was at the factory and I would see him in the lobby and we would, both do this, and then we would, see each other from long distance. It was the first real conversation that I got to have with him. And he was candid enough to say, listen, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I can't really fill that much time. We'll have to wait and see. I'm going to wing it. And of course, after it was his time to be up, he actually pulled up a couple of people from R&D, and then he actually had Rameen, who was one of the instrument designers, and it turned into a four-way conversation. Uncomfortably, they didn't have a microphone at first, because instead of being on stage, it was set for two people. They thought, we're just going to stand down here and do our very best. And of course, as soon as they turned the other way, nobody could hear a thing. So it wasn't long before they got a microphone and they started passing it around. But what they really wanted to talk about was the inception of the GPCE Inception. And not only did they talk about it, but they passed around a cut open guitar where you could actually see the bracing on the back, and a literal top with the bracing done. So while you're hearing all this stuff, from the horse's mouth, they're passing around a bracing pattern and you get to actually see what's going on. They spoke at length about how many things you really have to think about when you bring a guitar like that from the drawing board to production. They asked the appropriate person during the conversation about the wedge. What is the wedge and why was it shaped that way? Was that guitar going to have a wedge from day one? The basic reasoning behind when they want to design a maple guitar and they want to make sure that it's credible and that it has a place in the market. What's another really good guitar to measure it against? What should we go and do and buy from the competitors and put them in the R&D room? They really went into a lot of good detail. And I think for the first time in this show, why don't we take a moment and actually watch a clip of Fred Green, Rameen, Doug, and Nate all taking turns about behind the design GPCE Inception.
It's really important in teams like this. We have creative, sort of way out notions of and ideas, but we also need to be reeled back in by practical considerations. And that's one of the things that the R&D team is really great at. They don't pursue things that are too whimsical. They're open to anything, but they're going to give us the straight dope when we bring up something and say, "Hey, how does this work out?" They'll tell you, which is really valuable. So as we were developing this wedge, again, in keeping with the sort of smoothness of this design, it's got really smooth edges. There's not a ton of contrast between the fingerboard and the neck material, right? So it almost looks like a unitary piece. The smoothness of the bridge, the smoothness of the finish, and the smoothness of incorporating this walnut binding and this edge burst. The traditional D35 style backpiece wedge is totally straight, totally linear. And this instrument is really not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be a sort of a softer aesthetic. We think it achieves that really well. There is some science behind this. We wanted to maintain the widest portion of the wedge positioned directly behind the bridge. And this is something that our colleague Tim Teal is really good at, is sort of picking out design elements as well and saying, okay, so there's a very practical, technical application to this portion of the design. How can we also turn that into something that's really beautiful from an aesthetic standpoint on the outside of the instrument?
So taking all of that into account, obviously as designers, as R&D people, as people in charge of product, the last piece of that is, it's one thing to come up with a really cool piece, but these guys have to be able to make it.
Well, it's somewhat ironic that Fred is the guy that's mentioning how it's one thing to design something on paper, but these guys have to build it, because Fred is the visionary, and Fred comes up with all kinds of interesting concepts and thinks outside the box, and he evolved into that role. Now, this is somebody who had spent years at other major guitar companies before coming to Martin. And he and Jeff Allen had worked very well together, developing the old SC models that would come out based on the year. And, the CS models, rather, custom shop models. The old ones, not the modern ones, but the old ones like the CS 2111, things like that. And Fred moved into a role of a very much a conceptual designer, visionary designer. And I'm sure he heard multiple times by people in R&D or by the people who deal with the actual physical engineering saying, that's great, but we can't do that, for these different various reasons. But he's moved on to basically take the mantle over from Dick Bolk in terms of helping the artists design the artist signature models and stuff like that. So but he definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to trying to get a concept from an idea all the way through all of those different people that you saw on stage, as well as Tim Till and others. Josh in the sound room, various people who deal with the sound engineering. And this is a stellar example of it, because this was a very unusual Martin. If you're not familiar with the bracing, it's got bracing that has been drilled out with hexagon like honeycombs to trying to make the bracing as light as possible but maintain structural integrity and strength. And again, ironically, they call it a wedge because it's not a wedge, unlike Style 35 and other instruments that have used the Style 35 three-piece back. This wedge basically is, I've heard a lot of people describe the shape of it, but it's not a wedge in the sense of one end is much wider than the other one. And they did, I think it was Josh that was talking about, and this is back when the model came out, when we came and reviewed it, after the NAMM show, during the NAMM show, that they did go through a lot of experimentation. And their main goal was to try to increase the lower mid-range of this model to bring it back into a more classic Martin-sounding guitar. And they ultimately went with a walnut wedge that's between the maple back and the two sides, two plates on the side that are book-matched maple, and that they have the science to prove, the acoustic science, data to prove that the different materials they tried and the different shapes to that center piece varied greatly, and they eventually went with the one that they felt sounded the best and had the best low-mid boost that this guitar has, which is surprising for a maple guitar.
And I don't know if you were there that day or if you had just left, but I was asking Tim at the factory, this is, many months ago, how many iterations did you guys go through till you decided on that specific wedge? He said 50. There were 49 that did not get used. So if you picture yourself, how can we make this maple sound warmer, and how can we ... This wasn't like, think about it in January and put it out in February. This took a long time. And I don't think he'd ever trust me enough to show me on paper, but I'd love to see some of the blueprints or drawing board stuff where, imagine, I think it might have been Nate on this video who was saying the very, very beginning of this guitar, they put the wedge together and they said, that works. Man, is it ugly? So now, keep it working, but make it be something anybody wants to see. And I'm sure if you could be a fly on the wall at Martin, whether you're talking to designers or people in the R&D room, I don't know if it's when the guitar is first thought out, if it's a few months away from the very first day, and now you have a sense of how it's going to look in the end. I almost wonder how many times did somebody think, is that my phone or yours?
That was yours, and since you're doing that, I'm going to allow Her Majesty to enter the room. Come on. I think it was my cat texting you to say, tell him to open the door.
I know Tim Till is one of those guys that's responsible for make that functionality look like it's pretty, and they gave him a lot of props during that speech. But there are some things to be said about, wouldn't you be curious? I know you get to take a peek at some of the custom shop stuff and the your eyes only, and nobody can hear about this for 2 years. I know you got a chance to play the early SC models, and you saw stuff that nobody heard about for years and years. I wonder if there is a secret room within a secret room at Martin, and we can find the ugliest wedged version of the GPCE Inception. If they didn't put it in the baler or the trash compactor by now, but just let yourself imagine. First of all, if you're not totally sure you like the looks of the GPCE Inception now, consider yourself lucky that they didn't go with version 3 or 4, right?
Heck, some people probably would have preferred them the way I know some guitar players. But so that was interesting. It was also interesting when they mentioned about, and this is something that I've written about over the years too, about how, and I remember George Loudon very late in his life, actually was quoted as saying, gosh, I guess the back and sides would really do affect the sound, like somebody who's been building guitars his entire life. But yes, that fact that when the energy comes out, when as sound waves from this, in this case, spruce soundboard, it ricochets off of the back and around the sides and bounces around in there. So everything from the shape of the guitar body to in terms of where the curves are, where the struts of the bracing is, all that stuff, those sound waves are bouncing around in there. The specific interior shape of the sound chamber, cubic centimeters, all that stuff contributes, but so too does the species of the back and sides wood. And they said that like I said, they have the science to show that they can see the difference in the data of what that walnut wedge did compared to other woods that they used, and the specific size and shape of it. Understandably proud of the work that they did to come up with this new Martin guitar, and certainly not the last one we're going to see that's going to be using some of this modern bracing and other modern technology that went into it.
Matter of fact, those of you guys in the audience that day already know that Fred was honest and open about this will not be the last Inception, and it's not the last Inception that's already ready. I think there's something coming. I shouldn't say too much too soon, but it's not just that they probably will do something. Something else has already been done, and I'll leave it at that so they let me back in the building next time and I'm not giving away too many secrets. But I want to circle back to something you and I said on a previous podcast. At the same time Martin debuted a lot of new guitars, they also debuted a brand new string, the Lux by Martin Kovar string set. And I know the most recent episode, it probably was just the last episode we did, if not two or 3 weeks ago. The Martin Kovar strings are something Martin really wants to produce and demonstrate and bring to the market. And you have to imagine, I'm not sure if you think about this a lot, and when I say you, I'm saying to any listener or viewer, there are factions at Martin that are just as dedicated, if not more, to making sure that the strings get a fair shake. And I'm guilty of feeling like Martin is a guitar company and they also make strings. There are teams at Martin that feel we're a string manufacturer, we also make guitars, and strings are very serious for them. It almost feels like an afterthought. So I brought it up to Spoon, I think that was the order it went in. When you debuted the GPCE Inception, what was literally the reason you decided to put Kovars on there? And I think, Spoon, correct me if I'm wrong, were you coming from the point of view that they want to show these strings are so good that the new guitar deserves them? Is that the angle you were coming from?
Well, yeah, I think it's something that's shown up during the Chris Martin reign, that when they come out with new technology, new products, new materials, and they know there's a lot of traditionalists that are going to say, like the grumpiest, seventh dwarf, I'm again it, and and even without giving it a chance. And so I think that he's had a habit of saying, would we put this on this new CEO model if it wasn't a good tone wood or that kind of thing? So I think that's part of it. I think part of it too is the newness of it, and new string, new guitar. Then they're hoping to the people who are going to go out and buy this new guitar because they like the exciting aspect of this new invention, if you will, when certainly the cutting edge technology and engineering that went into it. Here's a string to go along with it. So I think it's both of those. I think also they know that traditional Martin players do not, by and large, like coated strings and treated strings. And these are not coated or treated strings, and yet they're still designed specifically to increase longevity and maximize the amount of time before the tone starts to degrade on these strings. And it's done through metallurgy. It's all done through the alloy that is used to create the strings, as opposed to taking what's basically a traditional brass string and then dipping it in something or painting something on it, or to try to prevent corrosion from the body chemistry of the people who are playing it.
Well, we're not the only people who think the strings were important. Here's another clip from the Martin Backstage event where Fred Green literally talks about the importance of bringing Martin Kovar out at the same time as the GPCE Inception. Let's take a look.
On this particular guitar, not the last thing we think about, but one of the things we think about is the strings, right? Because the strings have a lot to do with the way a guitar sounds. In this particular, we had new Kovar strings, which is sort of corrosion-resistant steel string that we wanted to put on a guitar because we wanted to highlight the string. In fact, if you go into the pick and parlor, all right, there's two guitars. There's an A and a B in there of Kovar strings on the same guitar. And you can play them, and one has the flex core string, so it's a more flexible core string, very soft touch on the inside, and then the other one is a standard Kovar string. And you can compare the difference in the way they feel, the way they play, the way they sound. And we'll also tell you that when we're testing guitars, one thing you want to do is you want to play the guitar, and you want to hear how it sounds when you play it, but you really should listen to somebody else play it and hear it out front, because it sounds much different out front. Many times when we're doing blind testing, the guitar they pick as the best guitar under ear is not the guitar they pick as the best one out front. So there is a big difference there. So you should really listen to the guitars in a couple of different ways.
I wish them luck. I have those strings on a couple of different guitars of mine, and I'm keeping them on really to test their longevity, partially because I'm not playing as often as I often do, just because of life stuff going on. And so I'm keeping them on. I'm just going to keep them on. And I'm on a mahogany guitar and a rosewood guitar. And soon we'll be having the part 2 podcast about those strings, and with some other topics probably as well. But I thought it was interesting that he was saying that in the picking parlor right now, they on purpose have 2 guitars with those strings. One of them is the flexible core version, and one of them is the regular core version. So you can see the difference in string tension when you're playing. And I've always felt flexible cores are more designed for rock and rollers and blues players who want a lot of play and waggle in the string and want to be able to bend the strings closer to what you can with an electric guitar. And the regular tension is for more the traditional people who play really hard, probably harder than you might play if you didn't go to music school, and that would be me, who usually typically puts a lot of emotion in my playing and play harder. So I have a harder time with flexible core strings to keep them from buzzing, to keep them from whacking into the frets and stuff like that, which I don't mind. I mean, I know there's a lot of people, all you have to do is go listen to Robert Johnson or a lot of those old blues guys. Their strings are buzzing and whapping frets all over the place. And, it's kind of part of the mystique. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And it hadn't even occurred to me to do that same test. Where I should have, thought about putting They basically gave me sets of strings, and so I just used what they gave me. But I think the ones that I have are all the flexible core strings, and I didn't realize they were going to make them in non-flexible core, so I would like to get a set of those and try them out.
Oh, I hate to ask this because every time I do, you get excited. May I embarrass myself on the microphone with you, please?
Oh, by all means.
I have to go back and look at my receipt. I do not know which version of the Kovar strings I put on my Ohm 28V for my big test. I played them 1 hour old, 2 weeks old, 4 weeks old, and all this time I think I'm trying the flexible version, but I do have to go back and look. So I want to make one little addendum to the reviews we put together and the videos and the podcasts where I compared Martin Kovar strings to Martin Foster Braun strings. I have yet to figure out exactly which version of the Kovar I did. But mark my words, that's going to be the first thing I do after we get off this program. So,
well, we can add that to that upcoming podcast.
Very good. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to make a big left turn. It seems like we spent most of this program so far talking about the GPCE Inception, the new Martin Backstage program, everything into the future and beyond. But there was one little part of the event back at Martin during the Backstage where they talked about something extremely old And this is going to be near and dear to your heart because I know you've done the same thing, albeit through different channels. Why don't you tell our listeners what it means when you have a Martin conversion, and I will take it from there.
Well, that's something that Martin had started some time ago, and then they stopped doing it for a long time. And that what they were doing is they were acquiring Martin guitars that had been damaged. Typically, the tops were unplayable, broken up, and sometimes the necks were gone. But they had healthy back and sides and Brazilian rosewood back and sides, which of course are extremely difficult to come by. This was often old growth. These were often guitars from the 20s and 30s, really all the way up into the 60s. But what they typically would do, whether the back and sides were from 1967 or 1927, they would retop them at Martin with Adirondack spruce and use what we would now call authentic series style bracing. And this goes back before they even had authentic series style bracing, but that once they came up with that, they started doing that. And then they stopped doing it for a while. And they used to do it for customers who would come in with an old guitar and say, "Can you retop this for me?" And they would say yes. They stopped doing that. They went out of that business, and now they're back to it. And this guitar was a 1927. I don't remember now, but it's 1920s 12-fret tripolo, which they resurrected as a 0042. So it's style 42 with the big round snowflake at the 5th fret and nothing above that on the neck. And then, with the bound neck and the whole thing and the wide, they didn't go into detail about the net width, whether it was 1 7/8 or if they cheated it down to the 13/16 or 1 3/4 inch or whatever. But it's probably nowadays they tend to do the 13/16 instead of 1 7/8. But with a V-neck and duded it up and vintaged it up, and it's now, if it's not yet on, it will be on sale at their Martin Reverb store. So I'm sure for a princely sum. So it's nice to know that they're doing that again. I hope they keep it up, keep doing it. Mine was my Dreadnought was done by 2 retired Martin employees, that Dave Strunk and Rich. Senior moment. What's Rich's last name?
Eckert,
thank you. Rich Eckert at Brothers Music. They don't do conversions anymore, but I had bought a destroyed 1966 D28. Basically, it was just the back and sides. It had a big hole that had been in the side of it, and it lost the neck and lost the top. And they did basically a D28 authentic 1937 top for me. And Dave was one of the very first people to build the original authentics and was in that project. But they put a modern neck on it with a truss rod for me for my hands. And I absolutely love it. It's fantastic, but I highly recommend it for people who are lucky enough to come across a destroyed Martin but still have viable back and sides. But so that was very cool, and I'm hoping to get a chance to play the guitar before it's gone, but it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to do it because I have a feeling it's going to be gone like tomorrow. But
unless somebody bought it for you.
You shouldn't have.
I shouldn't. Let's take a quick minute and see what Fred has to say about the 1930 0042, brand new with warranty.
Many times we'll take old guitars that are broken and are busted to pieces, and we will refurbish them. And just to show what can be done inside, 1930 guitar came into the factory. We bought it, smash top. It was pretty much gone. But lucky for us, the back, the sides, the neck, those things were still intact. So we took that guitar, we've converted it into, it's a 0042 style, 1930. This will go on sale in our Martin Reverb store soon, probably within the next month. So we'll be selling this guitar. It's not very often that you'll have the opportunity to buy a 1930 0042 with a lifetime warranty that looks brand new. So it's Brazilian rosewood, the opposite of everything else. We have that guitar here if you want to come take a look at it. So just keep an eye out on our Reverb store for that. You'll be seeing that come soon enough. You don't see that kind of wood anymore, not from us anyways.
So we're going to put all the links in the description if you'd like a shortcut to that Reverb listing for the new 0042 1930. Check it out and tell them Spoon and Maury sent you.
Yeah, 1930. That makes it a rare indeed, because that's the year they brought out the OMs, and by 1934 they had completely stopped building 12-fret guitars except for the 0021, and that was their most popular rosewood model. So this may have originated as a 0021, but they don't actually tell us that.
Oh wow! I was surprised when you told us Brothers doesn't do any conversions anymore.
Yeah, no, they went out of the conversion business several years ago because they have too much work just doing restorations. And they do the restorations for vintage instruments in Philadelphia and restorations for, a lot of private clients, professional musicians. And so it was just like too much work for them, really, when they already had their hands full with customers wanting their vintage Gibsons and Martins and Epiphones and whatnot restored for, for the person who actually owns the guitar. That's pretty good for Tippy, our friend, John Hall, because he's in the restoration business and be happy to do the conversion business rather, and be happy to do a conversion to a 1930s style bracing. If you want to bring him an old Martin from the 50s or 60s or whenever, he'll be happy to help you out.
Yep. Or if you have a really nice new guitar and you want him to make it look like it was broken in 1930, he'll do that too. Although I do kind of feel like we're friends with both the Yankees and the Red Sox, because we're good friends with both John Hall at Blues Creek Guitars over there and Rich and Dave at Brothers Music. I wonder if we can get them on the program sometime for like a big arm wrestling thing or something.
Well, and there's also David Musselwhite, who is basically a mentor to all of them. And they may officially be in competition to a certain extent, but they all support each other, and they literally let each other borrow their hot glue pot and all that kind of stuff. So they're very supportive. They'll buy tops from each other. My top, in fact, the brothers bought my Adirondack top from John Hall, and he had already put it together. He was already joined, right. And they bought it to put on my guitar. So they help each other out. So it's not quite Red Sox Yankees.
Wow. Do you think there's any opportunity that they might all get together someday and it would be called like Four Blues Creek Brothers Music or something? I'm just asking.
You keep thinking, Butch, that's what you're good at.
My favorite line from Titanic. I love it. We do have more notes to get to here. Did you see that thing that went around the internet? It's probably not new for a lot of people, but I just saw it for the first time, where Kate from the Titanic is sitting there posing for a picture, feeling cute, might let Jack drown later.
I have not seen that.
That's pretty good. Might let Jack drown later. This whole thing was called Backstage / An Evening with Chris Martin. Is it almost a sin? We're more than 30 minutes into this program, haven't even talked about questions yet, and we haven't talked about Craig Thatcher or Chris Martin.
Well, that's true. They basically did a version. Well, he spoke basically off the cuff, and brought in a lot of the recent stuff. But they've been doing a presentation for some time now around the country, where really even before he retired, because I saw him here in town long before the pandemic, and where Chris would talk about the family history, the history of his great-great-great-great-grandfather's life in Europe and the reasons he came to America and how he founded the business in New York City, how they moved out to Nazareth, and all the way up through his other descendants. And then Craig would play various examples of guitars. Sometimes they would have 19th century guitars. On this show, it was different. They had guitars from Chris Martin's personal collection. And do you remember anything about those guitars, or what you may have a better understanding what we're allowed to talk about and what we're not in terms of that? But
Yeah, there are two answers for everything you're going to ask. There's what I saw and what we can talk about. But it was really interesting. They had probably 24 guitars lined up. And if you're watching the video version of this podcast, A, thank you very much, patrons. And B, I'll try to put a picture here of the lineup. And it was kind of hard to keep watching Chris Martin and Craig Thatcher because you had to look past this line, really select instruments from basically Chris started the conversation by saying as a CEO, he kept one of everything they made since he was there. So he said, he made a joke. A lot of companies sell their prototypes, and accounting isn't really that happy that he kept everything. But at any moment, if he would just walk around and he'd let Craig play a song, and Chris would just walk the floor and I'll grab that and I'll grab that, and it would tie into the part of the conversation that was linear as far as the history. So what I can definitely say is they could have taken that show in any direction at any time. They certainly went chronologically to a point, but whenever they wanted to talk about something, they had at least 3 or 4 different guitars they could have gone to. And at one point, it was really cool where they brought out the Robbie Robertson guitar. It was all Koa. And of course, Craig fell right into the trap of playing something by the band. Robbie Robertson tune that you guys might know I'm talking about. When he got to the part about the folk movement, they had a great Joan Baez 045. And matter of fact, let me take one quick break here and cut to a really cute story you may not have heard before, where not Chris Martin, but Craig Thatcher educates us on the Joan Baez signature model, how it came to be, and what's important about it upside down.
So this guitar is a Joan Baez 045, a recreation of her 1929 045. So it came back to this facility for some repair work because our buddy Dick Boak saw her on TV and she was no longer using her original 29045. And he asked her, why aren't you using that? Well, it needs some repair. So he had her send it in for repair work. It came to this facility, went back to the repair center, and Dick got a frantic phone call. You got to come back here and see what we found. So what they found underneath the guitar, on the top, written backwards, which could only be seen with a mirror, it said, "Too bad you're a communist." So apparently, some other repair person, not at Martin, wrote that, took great pains to write it backwards so somebody maybe in future generations would actually stick a mirror in there and see it. So when this guitar was recreated, there's a decal under there, written backwards, that if you get your mirror out, your inspection mirror, you can see it says, "Too bad you're a communist" on there.
I think it's interesting. He said it wasn't somebody at the factory. I don't know if that's true. I've always heard it was somebody. Well, we don't know, but somebody did some repair work on it at some time and accomplished their clandestine commentary, which I think she thought was hilarious once that was discovered. But I used to get to see one of those fairly often by somebody who lived here in New York, and I was always astounded at how 12-fret O's sound so big, and they call them concert models for a reason. And you can play a whole concert, as she has proven. All you have to do is go see her at Woodstock playing that through an SM57, to 500,000 people or more. And and the Robbie Robertson, which brought it up to a 00 size, and I thought it was going to be the Steve Miller at first when I first saw it, but it was actually the Robbie Robertson model. And he had that, like you said, they transitioned. They were talking about the ukulele and the Hawaiian music craze because Chris is now reading this enormous book about Hawaiian music and the Hawaiian music craze that swept America after the 1912 Pan-Asian exhibition in San Francisco. And that led to Martin being the first mainland major manufacturer of ukuleles, and how they kept with it and how it actually helped them survive during the Great Depression, which he didn't really go into because they were much cheaper than guitars, and a lot of people bought Martin ukes through the bad years of the Depression in the 30s. but how that also led to the Major Kealaki guitar, which was a huge player in Hawaii at the time, superstar, that wrote to Martin and asked them to make a guitar bigger than the tripolo that he had been playing. And it turned into a model that they never knew existed. They completely forgot about until they discovered in the archives the correspondence between him and Frank Henry Martin, Chris's great-great-grandfather. And they now realize that was the real prototype that led to the Dreadnought. And it wasn't just the 12-fret Dreadnought invented out of the blue. And so that's very cool. And they just came out with a second version of that guitar for as a limited edition that's available for sale right now. But that got them talking about Koa, and that led to the Robbie Robertson model. And so it was very interesting, the almost flow or stream of consciousness presentation that went on, because, like you said, he was just on a whim deciding what guitar to pick up and what he thought it would be interesting to talk about. And in some respects, I feel sorry for all the people who couldn't be there, that are behind-the-scenes people that weren't, just couldn't make it, and for the people who can't be behind-the-scenes people for one reason or another. And it was a rare opportunity to see Chris Martin basically riffing, as it were, on stage with all those cool guitars, and Craig Thatcher with his amazing chops. So, really cool.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking to Chris afterwards, and he was outside. There was a big meet and greet afterwards outside under a tent where they had some hors d'oeuvres and some wine, and we all got to share a minute with Chris. And I pulled him aside, and we were talking really quickly about the way the whole evening flowed, and it was really nice to start with Thomas. Got a lot of good information out of Fred. And then he said, and by the time it came to us, he said he feels like the history of Martin guitar and the Chris Martin speech part of that evening can feel really rushed near the end, because you don't want to make people sit there for 2 or 3 hours. And he said the part that I'm involved in, by the time we get into the 60s and 70s and it's my turn, he said it's almost over and we really can't do a lot because we spent so much time. So many things happened on Martin guitar, someone else's watch. And I joked, and I said, well, next time you really should start in 2024, work backwards. And if you don't get back to 1833, that's don't worry about it. And some other people in line started laughing. He said, yeah, that way, because it's funny. Chris is the one with telling the story, and he's there telling everybody's part besides his own. And by the time it's his turn, hurry up and get it over with. And I said, when you take this on the road, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, Spoon, when it's Craig and Chris and they take it to a Martin dealer in your town, how does the format really feel? He said, well, after about an hour and 15 minutes, you really kind of read the room, and do people really want to, he called it audience fatigue, and you can certainly make the argument that can be a 4-hour, 2-day event, and you still wouldn't cover everything. But he said after a while, it's like, yeah, that's nice, but I got to get up and stretch. So pairing that this past Friday or whenever it was at the Nazareth event with a lot from Fred Green and a lot from Thomas, it was probably too much to ask people to just sit there knowing that once you climb out of the sawmill, you're going to go outside. He said, don't and they said, you're not allowed to rush to the bar. We have to take a group photo first. Near the end of Chris's speech, it really does kind of get like I have more to say, but all right, same here. I have a lot more to say before I ask you 20 questions. But if you don't mind, let's take one more pause and just give you a little bit more of Chris and Craig from the Nazareth event, Backstage 2024.
Thank you. And then all of a sudden we just have a guitar and we call it the Dreadnought. Where did that come from? And he goes, oh, my father was a history buff. He named it after a class of British battleships. And so you've heard me talk about the Dreadnought. You've heard me talk way too long about the Dreadnought, right?
It's
Again, I
always
could
a
spend an
fascinating
hour.
story, yeah.
I've become fascinated by the history of World War I, the history of the Dreadnought battleship. What's that? The saying, the sun never set on the British Empire, right? The British ruled the seas because they had the most powerful navy on earth. So Jackie Fisher lobbies Parliament to make a new class of battleship, which they do in anticipation of World War I. And it was a game changer. We have a model of it in the museum, the first all big gunship. And so my great-grandfather, I believe, named this guitar after the Dreadnought to show solidarity with the British, one of our most important, and to this day, most important allies in the run-up to World War I.
I was going to say, he referred to his great-great-grandfather as being a history buff. A lot of people forget that it's not that they're a history buff. That was actual current events. That's when all that was going on. That's when he talked to, all the stuff he talked about was history to him, but it was all big time news at the time. It was, so it's interesting that he tied it into current events. I may reach out to him because you mentioned about going backwards. Herodotus, when he wrote history, that's exactly what he did. He started with his contemporary time and then moved back more and more back into the ancient, legend and myth stuff, and not that he was to be trusted as a historian necessarily, but so I'll bring that up with him. I think he'd probably get a kick out of that. I would recommend that he should do. I think people would be interested in seeing an evening just about his career, and just about starting with him coming into the company. Oh. So basically like a part two and going on from there. That all being said, I'm sure I'm not the only person who would have sat there for 4.5 hours and wouldn't in the least bit, maybe they could have done an intermission or whatever. And maybe if they had done that, then people could have gone to the bar and then sat back down and heard the Chris Martin life story and enjoyed it very much. But something to maybe suggest, behind the scenes. And I also knew he did want to make sure people had a chance to speak with him and, and ask him questions and it might be interesting to see what he might do with 20 questions.
Ooh, did you say 20 questions?
I did say 20 questions. So 20 questions is the game that we like to play where one of us, either the smart guy who is Maury or the wise guy who is Spoon, thinks up a marked guitar that's available for sale in the world today, and the other one has 20 questions to guess what guitar they're referring to. And they can guess up to 3 models, but those 3 models count as part of the 20 questions. And I do believe that Maury Rutch is going to think, Maury thinking, he's got a guitar in his mind, and it's up to Presto the undigitator to think what he's thinking about.
I am thinking of a Martin guitar, 20 questions on the clock, and go.
Okay, well, that first question is going to be the traditional question. Is this guitar made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Second question. Is this guitar a Dreadnought?
No.
Is this guitar available in the regular catalog, or is it a limited edition?
Regular.
Does this guitar have a spruce top?
No.
Does this guitar have a top made from a species of the mahogany family?
Yes.
Is this guitar in the 15 series?
Yes.
Is this guitar a D15ME?
Does not exist, no.
I thought you might be throwing me a curveball. Is this a D15M?
No.
Is this a D15M Streetmaster?
No.
Am I just not using the right nomenclature to say the model name?
No. That's not a question.
Because I don't remember. Now I got to think back. You said this is a Dreadnought.
No, I didn't.
And, you said it was not a Dreadnought. I thought you said it was a Dreadnought. Oh, well, that's a horse of different color. Is this guitar have 12 frets free from the body?
Yes.
Is this guitar the Triple O 15 SM?
Yes.
So I got my own way.
Now, how do you feel about me letting you ask Dreadnought questions all along the way after I said no, it's not one? That's pretty crappy?
I'm absolutely fine with that because I would have probably done the same to you, maybe, if I was in the right mood.
What do you know about the super secret D15ME? When's that coming out?
Give them time. Give them time. Yeah, when it comes to the 15, there was a time when they stopped allowing people to order custom 15s. Not custom 15, the old model called custom 15, but 15 series custom shops. Because certain big box dealers were using it as a platform to put a spruce top on it and add certain things to it and then sell it at a very high price as if it was some sort of custom shop instrument, when it was really just a tarted up 15, as our friend Tony Phillips would have said. And to this day, I would love to have a JC 1512 string. I think they would make a spectacular instrument. And just saying, for anybody at Martin R&D that's listening, bring back the J15 with a cutaway, onboard electronics, a 12-string. I think that'd be a really good guitar.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody at Martin for all their help and their willingness to let us share some of the backstage footage with you guys. They could have easily said, nope, off limits. If you're not backstage, you don't get to see it. But there are some really kind folks at the Martin Company. I want to thank you guys on record, letting us share some of our experience. Full transparency, we hope you recognize after watching this program that becoming a backstage member at Martin is certainly worth your time and the effort. Check it out. You can join for free or for $99 a year. If you like what you see there and you end up joining because of us, please shoot us a message. Let us know how you like it, what you think of it. And even if you're not a backstage member, don't forget it's always worth your time. If you get an opportunity to travel to Martin Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., you do get a chance to see the museum. If you reserve time ahead of time, there are tours, but you do have to reserve at least one day in advance. If you need more information there, it's martinguitar.com. And I think it's somewhere on the website, it's very easy to find the Visit Us section. But what we're trying to say is don't let it be that you have to look through the eyes of Maury and Spoon to get an up-close look at the Martin Guitar Factory. They want you there as much as anything else. So give it a shot. Take some time to make a trip. Plan an event for yourself. And hopefully the next time there's a backstage event, you'll bump into both of us in the audience because I'm not done going to them. And we're just grateful we're able to share some of our experience with you guys. If you like this kind of episode, please let us know. And we can do all we can to kind of get into Martin and let them know, listen, you got to do more things like that because our viewers and our readers and our listeners, because our viewers and our listeners want more. I know I want more. And if you want more, we're going to play you out of this episode with one more selection from Craig Thatcher at the Evening with Chris Martin from the 2024 Martin Backstage event at Nazareth. From all of us at Martins and More, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.
Thank you. This is one of my pieces. I call that 510 Sycamore Street.